Listen, when it comes to relationships, especially as we grow older, wisdom becomes your sharpest tool. It's not about playing games, it's about knowing your value, your boundaries, and the kind of energy you allow into your life. Too many women waste years giving away power, trust, and peace to men who haven't earned it. And if you want to protect your worth, there are 5 things you should never do with a man. Because the moment you stop doing them, that's the moment you start stepping into your strength. When you find yourself in a relationship, it's natural to want attention, affection, and closeness from the man you are with. That desire is not only normal but also human, because connection fuels intimacy, and intimacy is what makes relationships meaningful. But here's the truth many older women need to recognize. Begging for attention or affection is one of the most damaging things you can do to yourself and to the relationship. Why? Because the moment you feel like you need to chase it, the balance of respect begins to tip, and what was meant to be mutual love starts to feel like a one-sided pursuit. You should never find yourself competing for someone's basic acknowledgement, because love is not meant to be begged for, it's meant to be shared freely and consistently. When you beg for attention, you're teaching him how to treat you. You're telling him that the bare minimum is enough, that you're willing to lower your standards, that your presence is not valuable enough on its own. That slowly chips away at your self-esteem, making you feel less worthy over time. Older women, especially, who have already lived through the ups and downs of relationships, must understand that every time you accept crumbs, you are reinforcing the idea that you don't deserve the full meal. And you do deserve it. Your wisdom, your growth, your life experience have made you more valuable than ever. So why would you lower yourself to beg for something as basic as love and recognition from a man who should be giving it willingly? What happens when you beg for affection is subtle but powerful. At first, it might seem harmless. You send the extra texts, you call a little more, you remind him of your worth with words instead of letting your actions and presence speak. But over time, he starts to expect it. He becomes comfortable with you being the one who tries harder, who fills in the gaps he leaves open, who carries the emotional weight he should be sharing. This builds a dynamic where he feels no urgency to invest, no urgency to step up, no urgency to truly see you. Instead, you become the safety net he falls back on, knowing you'll always be there asking for scraps of his time and energy. That's not love, that's imbalance, and think about it. When has begging ever created genuine love? When has pleading ever inspired someone to value you more? If anything, it has the opposite effect. The more you beg, the less he respects you, the less he sees your strength, the more he takes you for granted. Affection, when authentic, does not need to be asked for repeatedly. A man who truly values you will make you feel wanted without you needing to remind him. He will pursue you not because you push him, but because he sees your worth and desires to honor it. Older women carry a special kind of power because they know what it feels like to give and end up empty. They've seen the patterns, they've lived through the heartbreaks, and by this stage in life, the lesson should be clear. Love that requires begging is not love worth keeping. It's not about being cold or distant. It's about understanding that you are worthy of a man who chooses to give you attention freely, without manipulation, without guilt, without making you fight for a spot in his priorities. The love you deserve should never feel like a performance where you have to earn applause. It should feel like a safe space where you're embraced without asking. What's even more dangerous is how begging for affection makes you lose yourself. Slowly, your happiness starts to hinge on whether or not he notices you, whether or not he texts back, whether or not he compliments you today. Your confidence becomes tied to his inconsistent validation, and before long, you forget how to stand on your own 2 feet. That is why refusing to beg is not just about relationships, it's about protecting your identity, your independence, and your self-worth. You must remind yourself that you were whole before him, and you will remain whole without him. Any affection he offers should be an addition to your life, not the foundation of it. Men respect what they don't have to be forced into. When you stop begging, when you hold your ground and let your standards speak louder than your words, you send a message that your love is valuable. If he wants it, he has to show up. He has to prove with his actions that he sees your worth, and if he doesn't, then he loses access to you. That's how you regain the power, by refusing to chase what should naturally flow toward you. When it comes to relationships, one of the biggest mistakes older women often make is sacrificing their self-respect just to keep a man. On the surface, it might look like compromise or flexibility, but deep down, it becomes a slow erosion of identity. Self-respect is the foundation of how others perceive you, and when you willingly give it up, you give up the very thing that makes a man admire and value you in the first place. No relationship should require you to silence your standards, abandon your boundaries, or betray your values. If love costs you your dignity, it is not love, it is control disguised as companionship. Sacrificing your self-respect often starts small. Maybe you ignore a comment that made you uncomfortable, brush off a lie he told, or excuse a pattern of behavior that doesn't align with your worth. You tell yourself, it's not that serious, at least I still have him. But each time you let it slide, a piece of your power is taken. You begin to shrink so he can feel bigger. You bend so he doesn't have to stand tall. And you stay silent so he doesn't have to face accountability. This is not compromise, this is self-abandonment, and it always ends with you carrying the heavier emotional weight. Older women in particular need to understand that self-respect is not negotiable. By this stage in life, you've worked too hard, endured too much, and grown through too many seasons to let someone undo your progress. You have lived through experiences that taught you the cost of ignoring your worth, and the wisdom you've gained is meant to protect you, not be discarded in the name of keeping a man. The more you give away your dignity, the harder it becomes to recognize yourself in the mirror, and the sad truth is, once self-respect is lost, it takes tremendous effort to rebuild. That is why guarding it fiercely is non-negotiable. When you sacrifice your self-respect, you train him to believe you will tolerate anything. He begins to see your forgiveness not as strength, but as weakness, your patience not as love, but as desperation. The result is a cycle where his behavior becomes worse, not better, because there are no consequences. And once you've shown that your dignity is optional, he has no incentive to treat you with the care, honor, and commitment you deserve. Love without respect always collapses because respect is the backbone of trust, and without it, affection is empty. Self-respect also influences how you see yourself in the relationship. When you continuously lower your standards, you stop recognizing your own value. You convince yourself that this is the best you can do, that maybe you're asking for too much, that maybe this is just how love works at this stage in life. But those thoughts are lies born out of fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of rejection, fear of starting over. In reality, holding on to your self-respect is what ensures that if a man stays, it's because he truly values you, and if he leaves, it's because he could not rise to meet your standards. Either way, you win, because you refuse to lose yourself. What many women don't realize is that men are drawn to women who value themselves. A man may take advantage of a woman who sacrifices her dignity, but he will respect and admire the woman who refuses to. There's a strength in saying, "This is who I am, these are my boundaries, and if you cannot honor them, you cannot have me." That kind of energy not only commands respect, but also filters out men who are unworthy of your time. By standing firm in your self-respect, you are protecting your heart from unnecessary pain and making space for someone who can meet you at your level. Sacrificing self-respect for the sake of keeping a man also sends the message that you are more afraid of being alone than of being mistreated. But being alone is never the worst thing. Being with the wrong man while losing yourself is far worse. Loneliness can be temporary, healing can be found, new love can come, but the damage caused by abandoning your dignity can linger for years. That's why it is far better to stand strong in solitude than to remain in a relationship that forces you to compromise your core values. The truth is, self-respect is magnetic. It attracts the right people, it sets the tone for how you are treated, and it sustains the kind of love that lasts. When a man sees that you will not bend your dignity to keep him, he either steps up to meet your worth or steps aside to make room for someone who will. And in both scenarios, you win, because the love you receive aligns with the respect you demand. One of the biggest mistakes many older women make in relationships is ignoring the red flags they see. Deep down, you know when something doesn't feel right. You feel that knot in your stomach, that hesitation in your chest, that whisper in your mind telling you to pay attention. But too often, women push those feelings aside, hoping that things will change, convincing themselves that it's just a phase, or telling themselves that every man has flaws. What starts as a small warning sign becomes a blazing alarm, and by the time you realize it, you've already invested too much of your time, energy, and heart into someone who never deserved it in the first place. Ignoring red flags is usually tied to hope. You want the relationship to work so badly that you overlook what's right in front of you. You want to believe that his inconsistency is temporary, that his lack of effort means he's just stressed, that his dismissive attitude isn't who he really is. But here's the truth. People reveal themselves in patterns, not promises. A man can promise you he'll change, but his actions will always tell you the truth. If the signs are there, it's not your job to excuse them away. It's your responsibility to acknowledge them and decide if this is the kind of love you want to live with. Older women, especially, must remember that time is precious. You don't have decades to waste on a man who shows you, from the beginning, that he is not capable of giving you the love, respect, and consistency you deserve. Red flags ignored in the early stages only become heartbreak in the later stages. What you allow in the beginning sets the tone for the rest of the relationship. If you ignore disrespect now, you will live with it later. If you excuse dishonesty now, you will suffer betrayal later. If you accept inconsistency now, you will face neglect later. The warning signs are not there to be overlooked. They are there to protect you from deeper pain. Ignoring red flags often comes from a place of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of not finding someone else. That fear convinces you to stay quiet, to settle, to lower your standards just to keep the relationship alive. But that's not love, that's survival, and survival mode in relationships will always cost you your peace. You have to trust that walking away from a red flag doesn't mean walking away from love. It means walking toward the kind of love that doesn't require you to ignore your instincts. Another reason women ignore red flags is the belief that they can fix him. You see the potential, the good moments, the charm, and you think if you just love him harder, support him longer, or stay patient enough, he'll become the man you need him to be. But potential is not reality, and relationships cannot be built on maybes. A man will only change if he chooses to, and it will never be because you ignored the signs. It will be because he faced himself and did the work. Your job is not to raise him, fix him, or heal him. Your job is to protect yourself by recognizing the signs that he is not ready or willing to love you in the way you deserve. Ignoring red flags also sends a dangerous message to him. It tells him that he can treat you however he wants and you will still stay. It teaches him that there are no consequences for his actions, no boundaries he cannot cross, no standards he must rise to. Once that dynamic is established, the relationship becomes unbalanced. He holds the power, and you are left constantly adjusting yourself to keep the peace. That's not partnership, that's surrender, and it always leaves you feeling empty. Older women have the gift of hindsight. You've likely ignored red flags before and paid the price. Maybe you stayed in a relationship longer than you should have. Maybe you overlooked the lies. Maybe you convinced yourself that mistreatment was just part of love. But those experiences were not wasted. They were lessons. They were reminders that your intuition is powerful, that your spirit always knows when something is off, and that ignoring those warnings never ends well. At this stage in your life, you can no longer afford to dismiss what you already know to be true. The truth is, red flags don't disappear with time, they only grow bigger. The man who disrespects you today will disrespect you worse tomorrow. The man who lies today will lie bigger tomorrow. The man who avoids commitment today will avoid it even more tomorrow. Patterns repeat themselves unless interrupted, and if you ignore the signs, you give permission for those patterns to continue. Choosing to acknowledge them early is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the kind of wisdom that saves you from years of unnecessary pain, wasted energy, and broken trust. Never give him 100% when he only gives you half. That is one of the most important lessons every woman, especially older women, must hold close in relationships. Love is meant to be reciprocal. It is meant to flow both ways with equal effort, equal respect, and equal investment. When you are pouring out all of yourself while he only meets you halfway, what you are building is not a relationship, but a lopsided arrangement where one person thrives at the expense of the other. And the problem is, when you constantly give your all to someone who gives you little, you start convincing yourself that this imbalance is normal, that this is what love looks like, when in reality, it is just emotional exhaustion disguised as commitment. Giving 100% when he only gives half may start with the small things. You're always the one planning the dates, checking in on how he feels, making sure he's comfortable, supporting his goals, and adjusting your life to fit his needs. Meanwhile, when it's your turn to be supported, when you need encouragement, or when you need to be prioritized, he only shows up halfway, if at all. At first, you might tell yourself it's just his personality, or that he shows love differently, or that maybe you're just more nurturing. But with time, the imbalance becomes heavier, and you start to feel the weight of carrying the relationship on your back. Older women have to remember that relationships are not about proving your worth by overgiving. They are about recognizing your worth and expecting it to be honored. When you give your all to someone who only gives you half, you are essentially teaching him that his effort is optional, that you will fill the gaps, that you will work twice as hard to keep the relationship alive while he can coast by. That doesn't make him respect you more, it makes him comfortable with doing less. And the more you give, the less he feels he needs to. That's why so many women end up drained, resentful, and unappreciated, because they've mistaken overgiving for love, when real love does not demand that you lose yourself in the process. This imbalance is especially dangerous because it creates a cycle. You give 100% because you want him to notice, to appreciate you, to finally step up. But instead of being inspired to match your effort, he becomes more relaxed, knowing you'll always go the extra mile. You try harder, he tries less. You show up more, he shows up less. Eventually, you realize that you're in a relationship where you're doing the work of two people, but only one person is truly benefiting. That is not partnership, that is self-sacrifice. There's also an emotional cost to this. When you constantly give more than you receive, you begin to question your own worth. You start to wonder if you're not lovable enough, if maybe you have to keep doing more to earn his affection. That self-doubt creeps in, and instead of realizing that the problem is his lack of effort, you turn the blame inward. But here's the truth, love should never be earned through exhaustion. If he cannot meet you at your level, the problem is not you giving too little, it's him choosing to give too little. Older women in particular need to guard their energy. You've already spent years giving, nurturing, and sacrificing in different areas of life, whether in past relationships, family, or careers. At this stage, you cannot afford to pour yourself out for someone who doesn't pour back into you. Your energy is precious, and your love is valuable. If a man cannot show up with his full self, then he does not deserve the fullness of you. You deserve someone who meets you at the same level, who understands that relationships thrive on balance, and who is willing to put in as much as he takes out. It's also important to remember that giving less when he gives less is not about playing games, it's about balance. If he's giving 50, then you give 50, not because you want to punish him, but because you value yourself enough to refuse to overextend. That balance is what keeps the relationship healthy. It's what ensures that you don't lose yourself trying to keep someone else happy. And it's what allows you to see clearly if he is truly capable of being an equal partner. Because when you stop doing the work for him, you quickly find out whether he's willing to rise to the occasion or whether he's content with letting you carry the load. At the end of the day, love is not about who can give more until they collapse. It's about two people who both show up fully, without needing to be begged, without needing to be convinced. When both people give equally, the relationship thrives. When one person gives everything and the other gives little, it becomes an unhealthy attachment. That is why you must never give him 100% when he only gives you half, because your love, your energy, and your presence are too valuable to be wasted on someone unwilling to match them. Never silence your voice just to keep the peace. That is one of the most common traps many women fall into, especially as they get older and become more concerned with stability, harmony, and avoiding unnecessary conflict. But silencing yourself in a relationship does not create peace, it creates suppression. Peace is not the absence of disagreement. True peace is the presence of honesty, respect, and understanding. When you hold back your feelings, your needs, or your concerns in order to avoid upsetting him, what you're really doing is teaching yourself that your truth doesn't matter, and teaching him that he doesn't need to listen. It often starts small. You bite your tongue when he makes a comment you don't agree with. You laugh off a behavior that bothers you. You tell yourself, it's not worth it, I don't want to argue. But every time you do that, you're stacking one more brick on the wall between your true self and the version of you he sees. Over time, that wall gets so high that you barely recognize yourself in the relationship. You've silenced yourself so much that you forget what it feels like to express your true thoughts, your true desires, and your true boundaries. That's not keeping peace, that's slowly losing your voice. For older women, this lesson carries even more weight because you already know what it feels like to hold things in for too long. Maybe you stayed quiet in past relationships. Maybe you ignored your own needs in order to keep someone else comfortable. Maybe you convinced yourself that being easygoing or agreeable was the key to keeping love. But what did it cost you? Silencing your voice always costs more than it gives. It costs you your authenticity, your confidence, and eventually your happiness. When you silence your voice, you create an uneven dynamic in the relationship. He gets to live freely, express himself, and set the tone, while you are left conforming to whatever makes him comfortable. That's not partnership, that's imbalance. A healthy relationship is one where both voices matter, where both perspectives are valued, and where both people can speak openly without fear of being dismissed. If your voice has to disappear for the relationship to survive, then it's not a relationship built on love, it's one built on control. Silencing yourself also creates resentment. You can hold your feelings in for a while, but eventually they build up. The frustration you swallow doesn't go away, it grows inside you, and one day it comes out in anger, bitterness, or emotional withdrawal. Instead of having the small conversations early on, you end up with explosive arguments later, or worse, you end up quietly disconnecting from the relationship altogether. This is why silencing yourself never truly keeps the peace. It only delays the conflict and makes it bigger when it finally surfaces. Older women especially must embrace the power of their voice. You have lived through enough to know that your thoughts, your wisdom, and your perspective carry weight. You are not a teenager learning about love for the first time. You are a woman who has built herself, who has endured challenges, and who knows what matters. Your voice is a reflection of that journey. When you silence it, you not only betray yourself, but also deprive the relationship of the honesty it needs to grow. Some women silence themselves out of fear of being abandoned. They think, if I speak up, he might leave. If I express my needs, he might think I'm difficult. If I set boundaries, he might not want to stay. But here's the truth. If your honesty drives him away, then he was never capable of loving the real you in the first place. A man who truly values you will want to hear your voice, even when it challenges him. He will not see your truth as a threat, but as an opportunity to build deeper trust. The right man will not ask you to shrink in order to stay by his side. He will create space for your full self to be present. It's also important to understand that your voice sets the tone for how you are treated. If you consistently stay silent, you send the message that your needs are optional, your feelings are secondary, and your boundaries are flexible. Over time, he will treat you exactly as you've taught him to, like someone whose comfort matters more than your truth. But when you speak up, when you express yourself clearly and consistently, you teach him that your voice matters and that your presence comes with value. True peace in a relationship comes when both people feel safe enough to be honest, It comes when disagreements can be faced without fear, when needs can be expressed without judgment, and when both voices are heard and respected. Silencing yourself might avoid temporary discomfort, but it destroys long-term connection. Using your voice may cause friction in the moment, but it builds a foundation of respect that lasts. Never depend on a man for your happiness or identity. That lesson is more important than almost anything else, because when you hand someone else the power to define your worth, you also hand them the power to destroy it. Happiness is not something that can be gifted to you by another person, and identity is not something that should be shaped by whether a man stays, leaves, approves, or disapproves. The danger of relying on someone else for your sense of fulfillment is that it makes you vulnerable to their moods, their actions, and their choices, none of which you can fully control. Real happiness and identity must come from within, because only then are they safe, stable, and unshakable. Depending on a man for happiness often starts quietly. You feel good when he compliments you, when he texts back, when he shows affection, and while those moments feel great, the problem comes when you begin to tie your entire mood to his behavior. If he's distant, you feel rejected. If he's inattentive, you feel unworthy. If he's inconsistent, you feel insecure. Without realizing it, your joy becomes conditional on his attention, and suddenly, you've lost control of your own emotions. That is a dangerous place to be, because it means you no longer own your happiness. He does. The same is true with identity. When you depend on a man to define who you are, you start to mold yourself into what you think he wants. You change how you dress, how you speak, how you spend your time, even what you believe, all in an effort to keep him interested or keep him close. Over time, you stop recognizing yourself, because you've built your identity around his preferences instead of your truth. And when the relationship struggles or ends, you feel lost because you no longer know who you are without him. That is why grounding yourself in your own identity is so critical. It means that no matter what happens, you remain whole. Older women especially must guard against this, because by this stage of life, you have invested years into relationships, careers, and families. You have poured yourself into others over and over again. And while that kind of giving can be beautiful, it can also blur the line between where others end and where you begin. Depending on a man for your sense of self only continues that cycle of losing yourself. At this point in your life, your happiness and your identity must belong to you, not be borrowed from someone else. Depending on a man for happiness also creates an unhealthy pressure on the relationship. It demands that he be your source of joy at all times, which is impossible for any human to fulfill. That kind of pressure either makes him feel suffocated or gives him too much power over you. Neither is healthy. Happiness is something you must bring into the relationship, not extract from it. When two people come together already whole, already grounded in their own joy, the relationship thrives. But when one person depends entirely on the other for fulfillment, the relationship becomes unbalanced, unstable, and draining. Another danger of tying your happiness and identity to a man is that it keeps you stuck in unhealthy situations. If you believe your worth comes from him, you'll tolerate disrespect, neglect, or even mistreatment just to hold on to him. You'll tell yourself, at least I'm not alone, at least I still have him. But that mindset traps you in relationships that steal more from you than they give. A woman who knows her identity and creates her own happiness will never settle for that, because she knows she is enough with or without him. Older women need to remember that happiness is built in the everyday choices you make for yourself. It's in how you take care of your body, how you nurture your mind, how you pursue your passions, how you spend time with people who uplift you, and how you honor your own boundaries. It's not in whether or not a man validates you on a particular day. The more you build your own joy, the less you'll need to depend on anyone else to provide it. And when you show up in a relationship already fulfilled, you attract a healthier kind of love, one that adds to your happiness instead of controlling it. Identity works the same way. Your sense of self should be rooted in your values, your experiences, your strengths, and your growth. It should reflect the lessons you've learned, the wisdom you've earned, and the goals you still hold for your life. When you depend on a man for identity, you shrink yourself into his shadow, But when you stand firmly in who you are, you create a relationship dynamic where he meets you as an equal, not as someone who defines you. At the end of the day, the love you deserve is the kind that celebrates the happiness and identity you've already built. It's the kind that respects your independence and admires your strength. A man can complement your life, but he should never be the foundation of it. The moment you realize that your happiness is yours to create and your identity is yours to own, you take back the power that no relationship should ever control.